Hello there. What is going on, everyone? Today we're talking about Grand Army for Star Wars Legion. This is that coveted double points battle that was sometimes played just a little bit under Legion's original version. And their question has been asked, what are the plans for Grand Army moving forward? And we got a little bit of light shined on this topic in a recent interview that Will Shick gave to Grey Squadron Gaming. And I'll put a link to that entire interview down in the video description below. But this definitely got me thinking about what the future could hold for Grand Army, some different directions that they could take, and some of my wish lists. And I definitely want to hear from you guys as well. If you guys are new here to the channel, I do talk a lot about Star Wars and tabletop games like Star Wars Legion, Armada, X-Wing, and so forth. If you're interested in those games and in Star Wars and tabletop gaming, you're definitely in the right place. Love to have you stick around. Click that subscribe button. We are also doing a $50 Amazon gift card giveaway that's running all the way through Halloween, so you have plenty of time left to enter to win that. You just have to be a subscriber and leave a comment on this or one of my videos. It's as simple as that. Definitely let me know one of your favorite large battles from Star Wars that you'd love to be able to recreate on your tabletop. For me, definitely the Battle of Naboo is one of those that, of course, launched the title of Grand Army. You know, Misa got the Grand Army, you know, from Phantom Menace. And it was great to see kind of two standing armies kind of face off against each other. It was a very cool scene, and I'd love to be able to recreate that. Of course, with Gungans sort of looming on the horizon as being the next big thing coming to Star Wars Legion, as hinted by the artwork and the rule book and numerous little leaks and hints. Of course, it's probably 2025 before we actually get the confirmation of Gungans coming, but with them coming, I think we're all going to definitely want to be able to actually do a Grand Army battle of Gungans versus droids. I think we're all going to want to be able to recreate that. And it does sort of beg the question, well, there certainly have been some things that are a little too big for Grand Army that was certainly addressed in this interview. So things like the ATATs, for example. So let me jump to what Will Shick was talking about when he answered the question about what are you guys going to do for Grand Army in this interview. He said basically, it's a little ways out. It's not going to be anytime soon, so that makes me think, you know, 2025, Q3, Q4, maybe 2026, something like that for Grand Army for Legion. I think a lot of their work right now with Legion is, you know, getting these new kits, these new hard plastic kits out and reprinting pretty much everything that was done in soft plastic for Star Wars Legion and getting the new format and that whole second edition finalized. Who knows, maybe it'll be considered third edition by the time, because it's 2.6, but it's also the second edition because it's a complete overhaul of the game. But then they said more is coming next year, so it'll probably be third edition by the time they get, you know, to 2025. Who knows? We'll talk about that when we get to it. But it seems like Grand Army isn't really their priority right now. It was never really a super prioritized format during 1.0 initially anyway. It was more of the, hey, I want to run all of my miniatures, and you want to run all your miniatures? Okay, let's do a double points battle. It'll take, you know, longer, and it'll be a 6x4 table, and that's all it really was. Now, he doesn't want it to just be, all right, we just double the points and say go nuts. Of course, you can certainly do that, and that's why I don't think he wants Grand Army to be that, because you already have that right now. You can already do that. You can already change the points as long as you agree with it with your opponent. The points limit of 1,000 is just the standard, you know, organized play points limit. That's the tournament points limit. That's the standard game points limit, and that's the points limit that game content is balanced around. Nothing stops you from running, you know, more or less points. Hey, I want a shorter game, let's run 500 points. I want a really short game, let's run 300 points. I want a long game, let's run 5,000 points. Will Shick even mentioned 3,000 points as an example of some possible scenario. It doesn't mean that that's what they're doing, but it's interesting to see that that's where his points are, or his mind is at when it comes to points. Because, again, Grand Army does not have to be just double points. If they're going to redefine Grand Army, and if they're going to make a new rule set or rule book for it, it could be at any points limit that they deem appropriate. And I think if you're going to be doing larger things like the ATTE, or even, oh, the lovely, lovely ATATs. I'm afraid the ATATs will be quite operational when your rebel friends arrive. Would love Would love to see these guys show up in Legion. I've talked about ATATs forever coming to Star Wars Legion. And these are things that Will Shick mentioned by name, the ATTEs and the ATATs as well. They're just too big for Legion as it is now, especially in the case of the ATATs. But if you go back to ATTE, is it too big? Kinda is the answer, unless you're going to shrink it down a little bit, and that could mess with immersion a little bit. You know, and maybe there's limits to how much you could shrink it, but I mean, unless you're going to shrink it down significantly, you just really can't make that work on a reasonable level in Star Wars Legion, because frankly, you need terrain. You know, and that's another thing, is when you have too many units on the battle. If you do a double or even triple size points battle, you're not going to have room. Terrain's going to get in the way. It's going to stop you from actually moving. It's going to stop you from having fun. So maybe to do a proper Grand Army battle, you need a flat battlefield. I made jokes a long time ago about flat battles because you've got these giant shield generators that could do it. And I think the Battle of Naboo gives us a great answer to how we would do a Grand Army game in Star Wars Legion, because these shield generators were able to kind of make up for the lack of cover. It forced engagement. It forced you to get close, because if you were too far away, there were shield generators involved that would block those shots. And so I think that could be one way to do it. Limit terrain, you know, make sure that your tabletop is accommodating lots and lots of units and not lots and lots of buildings. I think, you know, when you want to populate the terrain a whole lot more, that's when you play your existing games. That's when you play regular standard Legion. You've got plenty of room for terrain in Legion. But if you wanted to do a 3,000 point battle, for example, you're going to need a lot of empty space to be able to fit all those units. You might still have some terrain. You might still have some, like maybe one or two pieces. And to me, that feels a little bit more like Warhammer. It feels a little bit more like, you know, when I play Age of Sigmar, we only have a couple of pieces, and because there's a lot of units on the battlefield. There's a lot of big units that have bases that are like this big, and you know, you need room to be able to place them down, and that's it's a harder thing to do if you have a very packed battlefield. So he did say that Grand Army would be a ways out. They would want to make it their own thing, and they would want to make it just a double points, because again, you can already do that now. He said the format is well deserving of its own rule set, and I think that's an interesting thing. Now, when he was talking about the ATTEs and the ATATs, he also mentioned that while they were too big for Legion, if you look at Grand Army, then all of a sudden now maybe they're not. So could it be that stuff like the AT-AT gets released for Star Wars Legion? Could it be that this and other similarly large vehicles, you know, the ATTE, the MTE, and any of the really, really big things, or even those giant shield-generating dinosaurs for the Gungans, could it be that they get released as a Grand Army unit? Or maybe they have a Grand Army, you know, specific unit card that only work in Grand Army. Well, that could work, and I think that's a great way to go, but I think you would, to make it make the most business sense to release something like this for Star Wars Legion, you'd have to give it multiple roles that it can perform. Here is my pitch. The AT-AT comes out. Maybe it's 1,000 points, maybe it's 800 points, I don't know. It comes out for Legion. It has, it's only legal in Grand Army. Can't run it in regular Star Wars Legion. At least, not normally. You also market it as a terrain piece for regular Legion, which then again, now it can go in any game of Star Wars Legion. But you also market it as a scenario for regular standard Legion. Now it's a custom scenario that people can run. Again, they used to do this with all the terrain pieces a long time ago, because Fantasy Flight, when they started making Legion, they didn't have the license to make just straight up terrain. They couldn't just make terrain. So if they made terrain, they had to give it some kind of unit card or some kind of scenario basis. So it was a game expansion rather than just a terrain expansion. So because of that, now I'm not sure if that is still the same thing, because AMG certainly does make things that are just terrain. But the question here is, you know, how would this work? So I think if you give it 3 different modes for one of these things, like, hey, here is a terrain piece, it's also a scenario, and it's also a unit that works in Grand Army. Now you've got 3 different bits of functionality, and of course on top of all this, it's a honking awesome, huge, gorgeous model, and I'm sure that they would do very, very well with something like this, especially allowing it multiple poses. because I think you really, really do well if you make it possible to run more than one of these in Grand Army. If you wanted to really just open it up for a 6x4, you know, just slobber knocker of a battle, and you run and you pose them differently. Like you have one guy with all 4 feet on the ground, you have another guy with a 1 foot up, so it looks like they're, maybe the heads have a little bit of move and give to them. You basically build them differently. This could be incredible, and I actually would be tempted to buy at least like 3, 4, or even 5 potentially, just to have. Of course, I don't think I'd really buy that many, but it'd be so tempting, to do it because they're beautiful, and who wouldn't want a whole bunch of ATATs? Oh, it'd be really, really nice. So I think that's how you do it. I think if you're going to make an entirely new rule set for Grand Army, I think you make some of the bigger things that people have been really hankering for, honking. If you've been honking your horn for big units like this may be the way to get them. It also means that they could potentially also come in as terrain pieces and also with potential scenario play. I don't think something like this big will ever actually be typically legal in a regular game of Star Wars Legion, although if we were to look at something like the ATTE, well then maybe it could. Maybe it could. And how would they get something like this that's maybe a little bit closer to being feasible in regular Legion, but maybe still a little too big? How would you get this in standard Legion? And the answer could also be battle forces. Battle forces are a great way to say maybe this is only legal in one battle force, and it's a specific ATTE support detachment battle force. And maybe it has this way you can do very custom rules for it. You can make it legal. Maybe it can't move in the game, and but it's just got this long-range artillery piece, and it can be fired upon or something like that. Maybe you even make it like not that powerful in its power. I'd rather it come in like slightly under the power curve. Like you've only got probably like typically a 40 to 45% chance of winning on when you run it. But just give you the option. I felt the same way when they came up with the Super Star Destroyer for Star Wars Armada. It was legal in regular play, but once people learned how to counter it and how to beat it, it wasn't usually that winning of a ship, but it was fun. And I think that's really one of the goals for like these really, really large vehicles, is they should be fun enough for that players want to run them, and such that when they're setting up on a store table, that people are walking by seeing these beautiful things, being like, oh my god, what game is this that you're playing? That's the kind of that's the experience I think a lot of people want to get. And I think big vehicles is definitely a way to do that. And the more modes that you can make available to a large vehicle, the better chances you have of this working. Now, I don't think the AT-AT really has a place as a battle force in Star Wars Legion, unless you were to make a battle force that was literally like just this, and maybe a single stormtrooper unit. I just don't know. I don't know how that would work, because it wouldn't be able to move, or would it? I just don't know how that's gonna work. But it could be a fun idea to explore, at least for like non-tournament games, and I wouldn't mind seeing stuff like that come out. Like here was the idea we throw around. It's probably not competitive, so we priced it at 1,001 points, so this way you couldn't actually do it, and that's certainly an option, but it's actually, to tell you the truth, they wouldn't have to price it that high, because you would still need to meet rank requirements. So even if they priced it at like 900, and even if they priced it at 900 points, you're not going to be able to fit a commander and 3 core to make it a legal list in there. So, I don't know exactly how they're going to do it, but I think the option of saying, hey, we've got our own rule set for Grand Army, so this is a special card that works only in Grand Army for these guys, but you can still use them as a scenario and a terrain piece in regular play. I think that's the way to go. But we're going to have to wait and see. Now, we do know that, they said it's worthy of its own rule set. It's something that's a little bit farther out, so we'll probably won't hear anything until next year, anything more concrete on what they're planning on doing with Grand Army. I thought another possible way to approach this would just to have an entirely different miniatures line in a different scale, like an 8mm or a 10mm kind of game, where your troopers are super, super tiny, and your vehicles are like this and this big and this big, and then your AT-AT would only have to be like this big, and you could fit multiple. Like, that's the game I really want to see for Star Wars, but I just don't see AMG doing another Star Wars dudes on a map ground game. before they finally break down and do a space game. Although that may be farther out. We'll talk about that in another video, though. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. And, of course, you can check out that Gray Squadron interview with Will Shick in the link in the video description below as well. And let me know your thoughts. Also, keep the discussion going in Discord and on social media and all of those. I want to thank my patrons. You guys are amazing and help make this whole channel possible. I will talk to you later. May the force be with you. Live long and prosper. Be excellent to each other. Party on, dudes. And always wash your socks.